The air in the courtroom felt like ice, thick with the scent of old wood and the suffocating weight of a life being dismantled. I sat at the mahogany table, my fingers trembling so violently I had to hide them in the folds of my cheap, worn dress. Across the aisle sat Tmaine. He looked like a king on a throne, immaculate in a $3,000 charcoal suit, his jaw set in a line of cold, calculated triumph. To the world, he was the self-made titan of industry. To me, he was the man who had promised to love me until death, but was now comfortably presiding over my social and emotional execution. "The defendant," Tmaine's high-priced lawyer announced, his voice booming through the silent chamber, "is not merely a woman who has lost her way. She is a void. Nyala has spent a decade as a ghost in a mansion she did not earn, failing in every fundamental duty of a wife and, most tragically, as a mother. She is emotionally unstable, financially parasitic, and a shadow that threatens the bright future of the only thing that matters in this case, their daughter, Zariah." The words felt like physical blows. I wanted to scream, to tell the judge about the years I spent waking up at 5 a.m. to ensure Tmaine's life was seamless. I wanted to talk about the sacrifices, the career I buried, and the way I moved like a shadow so as not to disturb his peace. But the lump in my throat was a mountain of unshed tears. I looked at the judge, a stern man with eyes like flint. He wasn't looking at me with pity. He was looking at me with the clinical detachment of someone reading a grocery list. Tmaine's lawyer continued, his voice dripping with feigned concern. "Your Honor, we are not just asking for a divorce. We are asking for the restoration of order. We demand full custody of Zariah, the entirety of the marital assets, and the immediate removal of the defendant from the family home. She has contributed nothing but silence and incompetence." Then came the moment that felt like the end of the world. The double doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. My heart stopped. My 7-year-old daughter Zariah walked in, escorted by a court official. She looked so small in her private school uniform, her eyes wide and searching. Tmaine leaned forward, a predatory, confident smile touching his lips. He had told me she would testify against me. He had spent weeks whispering in her ear. I was sure of it. He was going to use my own heart to stab me. "Zariah," the judge said softly, his expression softening for the first time, "do you understand why you are here?" Zariah stood at the witness stand, her small hands gripping the edge of the wood. She looked at Tmaine, who nodded encouragingly, and then she looked at me. Her eyes weren't filled with the hatred Tmaine had promised. They were filled with something else, something heavy. "I do, Your Honor," she whispered. Her voice, so small yet so clear, echoed in the vast room. "But before we talk, can I show you something my mommy doesn't know?" The courtroom shifted. Tmaine's lawyer frowned, looking at Tmaine, who merely shrugged, confident in his daughter's programmed loyalty. The judge tilted his head, intrigued. "What do you have, Zariah?" Zariah reached into her small backpack and pulled out her school tablet. "I've been making a project," she said, her voice gaining a strange, haunting strength. "For a long time, I wanted to show what my life is really like at home when the lights are low and the doors are closed. I pressed play, Your Honor." The judge nodded. Zariah turned the screen toward the bench and pressed the button. The court clerk connected the feed to the large monitors on the wall so the evidence could be recorded. As the video flickered to life, the room fell into a silence so profound you could hear the heartbeat of the person next to you. The image was grainy, recorded from the corner of a bookshelf in our kitchen. It was dated 6 months ago. The video showed me, Nyala, scrubbing the floor on my hands and knees at 11 p.m., while Tmaine stood over me, his face twisted in a sneer, deliberately pouring a glass of red wine onto the clean tiles. "Clean it up, Nyala," his recorded voice hissed, cold and sharp as a razor. "It's the only thing you're good for. And don't let me see a single stain, or I'll make sure you sleep in the garage tonight." The courtroom gasped. Tmaine's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. But the video didn't stop there. It was just the beginning. The failed mother and failed wife narrative was about to be burned to the ground by the very child Tmaine thought he had weaponized. But to understand how we got to this doomsday in the courtroom, we have to go back to the beginning of the end. We have to go back to that final morning in our house, a house that felt more like a beautifully decorated cage. The morning began like any other. I was in the kitchen, the air thick with the scent of coffee and the quiet hum of the washing machine. I moved like a ghost, a skill I had perfected over years of marriage. In this house, silence was safety. To be loud was to be noticed, and to be noticed by Tmaine was to be criticized. At exactly 6 a.m., the floorboards upstairs creaked. My pulse quickened. I straightened my simple cotton dress, smoothed my hair, and placed the black coffee on the table at the exact spot he preferred. Tmaine descended the stairs, looking like the cover of a business magazine. He didn't look at me. He never did anymore. He sat down, his eyes instantly locked onto his phone, his thumb flicking through emails as if I were just another piece of furniture he had paid for long ago. "The coffee is bitter today," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "I'm sorry, honey," I whispered, my voice sounding small even to my own ears. "I thought I measured it right this time." He didn't argue. He didn't even look up to see the hurt in my eyes. He simply pushed the plate away, the breakfast I had spent 40 minutes preparing, untouched and cooling. In that silence, I felt the ghost of our marriage haunting the room. I remembered when we used to laugh over burnt toast in a tiny apartment. Now we had everything, and I had never felt more empty. "Is Zariah up?" he asked, still staring at the screen. "Yes, she's showering. She'll be down in a minute." When Zariah ran into the room, she was a burst of color in a gray world. "Good morning, Mommy. Good morning, Daddy," she chirped, kissing my cheek. When she reached Tmaine, he finally put the phone down. A performative smile stretched across his face, the good father mask he wore for the world. "Good morning, Princess," he said, his voice dripping with a calculated sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Finish your food. Daddy is taking you to school today." Zariah's face lit up. She loved those car rides, unaware that her father used them to slowly sow seeds of doubt about my instability. I watched them leave, the roar of his luxury car fading into the distance, leaving me alone in the vast, hollow silence of the mansion. I didn't know then that by noon, a courier would arrive with a brown envelope that would shatter my life. I didn't know that Tmaine had been planning my destruction for months, but most importantly, I didn't know that my silent 7-year-old daughter had been watching everything through the lens of a camera, waiting for her moment to speak. The house was too quiet. After the roar of Tmaine's car faded, the only sound left was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer, a constant, mocking reminder of the hours I spent maintaining a life that didn't belong to me. I moved through my routine like an internal clockwork toy. I cleared Tmaine's untouched plate, the eggs now cold and rubbery, and scrubbed the table until the wood gleamed. I did the laundry, folding his expensive shirts with military precision, making sure every crease was sharp enough to cut. I lived in a state of perpetual good enough. I believed that if I could just make the environment perfect, the man I married would eventually find his way back to me. I thought my silence was a gift to him, a way to lower his stress. I didn't realize that in Tmaine's eyes, my silence wasn't a gift. It was a surrender. It was proof that I had become a non-entity, a ghost haunting the halls of his success. By noon, the sun was high, casting long, sharp shadows across the marble floors. I was preparing a light lunch for Zariah, humming a song she liked, when the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, aggressive sound that didn't belong in the quiet afternoon. I opened the door to find a courier in a dark blue uniform. He didn't smile. He didn't even make eye contact. He just held out a thick, heavy brown envelope and a digital pad. "Nyala?" he asked. "Yes," I said, a strange coldness beginning to settle in my stomach. "Sign here." I scribbled my name, my fingers feeling heavy. The envelope was thick, weighted with the density of legal cardstock. In the top right corner was the logo of a law firm, Hastings & Associates, one of the most aggressive, shark firms in the city. I knew that name. They were the ones who handled Tmaine's corporate acquisitions, the ones he hired when he wanted to crush a competitor. "Who is it, Mommy?" I jumped. Zariah had come home from her half-day at school, her backpack still slung over her shoulder. I hadn't even heard the school bus. I quickly tucked the envelope behind my back, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "Just junk mail, Princess. Go change out of your uniform and wash your hands. I made those little sandwiches you like." As soon as she skipped away, I retreated to the living room. I sat on the edge of the designer sofa, the fabric feeling cold against my skin. My hands were shaking so much I could barely grip the flap of the envelope. I tore it open, and the contents spilled out onto my lap like shards of glass. The words were printed in bold black ink. They looked official. They looked final. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I had been punched. I turned the page, my eyes scanning the lines, searching for a reason, a why. The petitioner, Tmaine, hereby requests the court to dissolve the marriage on the grounds that the respondent, Nyala, has fundamentally failed in the fulfillment of her marital and maternal duties. Failed. The word echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of the empty room. How could I have failed? I had given up my career in marketing, a job I loved, the moment he asked me to stay home and support his vision. I had raised our daughter almost entirely alone while he traveled for business trips that I now realized were likely something else entirely. I had been his chef, his maid, his secretary, and his emotional punching bag. I kept reading, and the horror deepened. He wasn't just asking for a divorce, he was asking for a total erasure of my existence. He was claiming full custody of Zariah, alleging that I was emotionally unstable and prone to hysterical outbursts. He was claiming that I had no right to the house, the savings, or even the furniture, because I had not contributed financially to the marriage since Zariah's birth. He wanted to throw me out onto the street with nothing, no money, no home, and most cruelly, no daughter. A shadow fell across the floor. I looked up, gasping. Tmaine was standing in the doorway. He was home early, unheard of for a Tuesday. He didn't look surprised to see me surrounded by the papers. He looked bored. "You got them," he said. It wasn't a question. He walked into the room, tossing his keys onto the side table. "Tmaine, what is this?" I managed to choke out, holding up the papers. "Failed? Incompetent? Unstable? How could you say these things? I've done everything for you." Tmaine stopped and looked at me. For the first time in years, he really looked at me, but there was no love in his eyes. There was only a cold, clinical disdain. He looked at me the way a man looks at a piece of machinery that has outlived its usefulness. "Look at yourself, Nyala," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You sit in this house all day, doing what? Cleaning? Cooking? A robot could do what you do. You've become a shell. You have nothing to offer me, and you certainly have nothing to offer Zariah. She needs a mother who is a partner, someone who understands the world I move in, not a servant who cries in the kitchen when she thinks no one is looking." "I cry because you treat me like I don't exist," I screamed, the tears finally breaking through. "I gave up my life for you." "And that was your first mistake," he snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. "I never asked you to be a martyr. I asked you to be a wife. You failed. And because you have no income, no assets of your own, and a history of unstable behavior, which I have carefully documented, the court will see that Zariah is better off with me." "You can't take her," I sobbed, collapsing onto the floor. The papers scattered around me. "She's my life. She knows I love her." Tmaine leaned down, his face inches from mine. His breath smelled of expensive mints and cold ambition. "Do you want to know the best part, Nyala? My lawyer has already spoken to the child psychologist. Zariah is going to testify. She's going to tell the judge exactly how sad and confused you make her. She's going to choose me because I represent the world, and you represent a prison." He stood up, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "You have 30 days to find a lawyer you can't afford. Don't bother trying to take anything from the house. It's all in my name. Always was." He walked out of the room, leaving me shattered on the floor. I looked at the papers, the ink blurring through my tears. I felt like I was drowning in a vast, dark ocean. But then, I heard a tiny sound. I looked toward the hallway. Zariah was standing there, partially hidden by the shadow of the doorframe. She was holding her tablet to her chest, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had heard everything. I tried to wipe my eyes, tried to pull myself together for her. "Zariah, honey, But she didn't come to me. She didn't cry. She just looked at me with a look of intense, quiet focus. Then, without a word, she turned and went back to her room. In that moment, my heart broke for the second time that day. I thought Tmaine was right. I thought I had lost her. I thought my daughter saw me as the weak, broken woman her father said I was. I didn't realize that in that moment, Zariah wasn't judging me. She was making a plan. The days that followed the delivery of the envelope were a descent into a specialized kind of hell. Our home, once a sanctuary of quiet routines, had transformed into a psychological battlefield. Tmaine moved through the house with the cold confidence of a victor, while I felt like a prisoner of war in my own skin. He didn't just want to leave me, he wanted to erase me, and he used every hour of the day to remind me of my insignificance. Tmaine began a campaign of gaslighting that was as subtle as it was cruel. He would move things, my keys, my phone, important documents, and then watch with a smirk as I paced the house in a panic, trying to find them. When I would finally find them in a place I had already checked a dozen times, he would sigh and shake his head. "You see, Nyala? You're losing your grip. You can't even keep track of a set of keys. How are you supposed to keep track of a child's life?" He started inviting friends over for dinner, business associates and their polished wives. He forced me to cook for them, to serve them like a hired hand, while he spoke about me in the third person as if I weren't in the room. "Nyala's been a bit overwhelmed lately," he would say, swirling a glass of expensive Bordeaux. "The stress of maintaining a household this size is clearly taking its toll. It's a shame, really." I would stand in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white, listening to the polite, pitying murmurs of his guests. I was being branded as unstable in front of witnesses, creating a paper trail of social opinion that would eventually find its way to the judge's ears. But the most agonizing part was Zariah. Tmaine was constantly in her ear. I would see them huddled together on the patio, Tmaine whispering to her while pointing at me through the glass door. He was buying her affection with expensive toys and promises of trips to Disneyland, things I couldn't provide now that he had frozen our joint credit cards. He told her that Mommy was sick and that she needed to stay with Daddy so she could be safe and successful. One afternoon, I walked past Zariah's room and saw her sitting on the floor with her tablet. She was so focused that she didn't hear me come in. She wasn't playing a game. She was scrolling through a series of videos. When she saw me, she jumped and quickly turned the screen off. "Zariah, honey," I said, sitting on the edge of her bed, "you know Mommy loves you more than anything, right? No matter what Daddy says, I would never, ever want to be away from you." Zariah looked at me, and for a second, the mask of a 7-year-old slipped. Her eyes looked ancient, filled with a heavy, secret burden. "I know, Mommy," she said, her voice a flat whisper. "I know everything." She didn't hug me. She didn't cry. She just went back to her tablet. I felt a chill run down my spine. Had Tmaine finally succeeded? Had he managed to turn my own daughter into a stranger? The nights were the hardest. I spent them in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I would fight back. I had no money. Tmaine had locked the bank accounts, claiming it was to protect the marital estate from my erratic spending. I called every lawyer in the city, but as soon as they heard Tmaine's name, they suddenly became unavailable. He had put the entire legal community on retainer just to conflict them out of representing me. I was a woman with no resources, no allies, and a husband who was a master of manipulation. One evening, about a week before the trial, Tmaine walked into the guest room without knocking. He threw a document onto the bed. "Sign this," he commanded. "It's a settlement. You get $50,000 and a 1-bedroom apartment in the outskirts. In exchange, you waive all rights to the house and give me full custody of Zariah. You'll get supervised visitation once a month." I looked at the paper, then at him. $50,000? Tmaine, your company is worth millions. This house alone is worth $3 million. And my daughter. You think you can buy my daughter for $50,000? Tmaine laughed, a short, barking sound that had no humor in it. "You're lucky I'm offering you anything. If we go to court, my lawyer will bring up your depressive episodes. He'll bring up the fact that you haven't worked in 8 years. He'll make sure you walk away with 0. And Zariah? She's already told the court evaluator that she wants to live with me. It's over, Nyala. Sign the paper and save yourself the public humiliation." "I will never sign that," I said, my voice shaking with a sudden fierce spark of defiance. "You can take the money, and you can take the house, but you will have to kill me before you take my daughter." Tmaine's face darkened. He stepped closer, his shadow looming over me. "Then prepare for doomsday, Nyala, because in that courtroom, I'm going to destroy the person you think you are. By the time I'm done, even you will believe you're a failure." He slammed the door, leaving me in the dark. I curled into a ball on the bed, sobbing quietly. I felt like I was at the bottom of a deep, dark well, and the light was fading fast. But in the room next door, the blue light of a tablet flickered. Zariah was awake. She had heard the threat, she had seen the shadow, and she was clicking save on a file that would change everything. The day of the trial arrived like a funeral. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the threat of rain, mirroring the suffocating dread in my chest. I sat in the back of a taxi, clutching a folder of handwritten notes, the only evidence I had, against the mountain of digital records and expert testimonies Tmaine had assembled. I had managed to find a young, overworked legal aid lawyer named Marcus who agreed to take my case at the last minute. He looked tired, his suit was a bit too large, and he looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional hopelessness. "Nyala," Marcus whispered as we walked up the courthouse steps, "they are going to play dirty. Tmaine's team has one goal, to make you look like a danger to your daughter's well-being. Keep your emotions in check. If you cry, they'll call it instability. If you get angry, they'll call it aggression. Be a statue." I nodded, but inside I was a crumbling ruin. When we entered the courtroom, the atmosphere changed instantly. Tmaine was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table. He looked magnificent. He was the picture of a grieving, responsible father forced into a difficult position by a broken wife. His lead attorney, Mr. Sterling, was a man with silver hair and a voice like velvet-covered gravel. The judge, Justice Miller, took the bench. He was a man known for his adherence to traditional family values, which in Tmaine's world meant the breadwinner held the power. "We are here today," Justice Miller began, his eyes scanning the room, "to determine the dissolution of the marriage between Tmaine and Nyala, and more importantly, to decide the permanent custody of their minor child, Zariah." Mr. Sterling stood up immediately. He didn't waste time. "Your Honor, this is a tragic case. My client, a man of immense responsibility and standing in this community, has spent 10 years trying to shield his daughter from the deteriorating mental state of his wife. We will prove today that Nyala is not only financially incapable of providing for Zariah, but that she has created a toxic, depressive environment that stifles the child's development." "I object," Marcus said, though his voice lacked the booming authority of Sterling's. "Overruled," the judge snapped. "Proceed, Mr. Sterling." Then began the parade of character assassins. Tmaine had hired a private psychologist who had never met me, but had analyzed my behavior based on logs Tmaine had kept. "In my professional opinion," the psychologist stated from the stand, "the defendant exhibits classic signs of borderline personality combined with chronic lethargy. Her inability to maintain employment or social connections outside the home suggests a deep-seated dependency that is harmful to a developing child. Zariah needs structure. She needs a parent who is engaged with the world." I looked at Tmaine. He was leaning back, a faint, satisfied smile on his lips. He was watching me, waiting for me to break. I gripped the underside of the table, my nails digging into the wood. I thought of Zariah, who was being kept in a side room with a court-appointed guardian. I felt like I was watching my own life being rewritten by a stranger. Next came the financial expert. He presented charts and spreadsheets showing that every cent in our lives had been generated by Tmaine's companies. "The defendant has zero assets," the expert concluded. "She has no earning potential in the current market. To award her any significant portion of the estate would be to siphon resources away from the child's future." It went on for hours. They turned my love into clinging. They turned my grief into clinical depression. They turned my role as a stay-at-home mother into financial parasitism. Finally, it was Tmaine's turn to take the stand. He walked to the witness box with a practiced, somber gait. When he took the oath, he looked the judge straight in the eye. "Tmaine," Sterling asked, "why are you asking for full custody? Why take a child away from her mother?" Tmaine let out a long, theatrical sigh. "It breaks my heart, truly. I loved Nyala once, but she stopped trying. She stopped being present. I would come home to a house full of tension. Zariah would be hiding in her room because Nyala was in one of her moods. I want Zariah to have a life of joy and opportunity. I want her to grow up seeing a parent who works, who fights, who succeeds. I can't let her be dragged down by the weight of her mother's unhappiness." "And the property?" Sterling asked. "Everything I built for my daughter," Tmaine said firmly. "Nyala has shown she can't manage a household budget, let alone a multi-million-dollar estate. I need to protect those assets so they can be passed down to Zariah." I felt a scream building in my chest. It was all a lie. The moods he talked about were the days I spent recovering from his verbal abuse. The tension was the fear he instilled in us. Marcus leaned over to me. "It's not looking good, Nyala. The judge is leaning toward them. We need a miracle." "The defense may cross-examine," the judge said. Marcus stood up, but before he could speak, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. It was Zariah. She wasn't supposed to be in the room yet. The court guardian was behind her, looking flustered. Zariah walked down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. She didn't look at Tmaine. She didn't look at me. She walked straight toward the judge's bench. "Your Honor?" Her voice was small, but it carried to every corner of the room. The judge frowned. "Zariah, honey, you're supposed to wait until we call you." "I know," she said, stopping at the foot of the bench. She was holding her tablet, the screen glowing against her white school shirt. "But my daddy said I was going to testify. He told me I had to tell you the truth about my mommy." Tmaine stood up, his face a mask of concern. "Zariah, princess, not now. Let the adults finish." "No," Zariah said, turning to look at her father. It was the same look of ancient focus I had seen in her bedroom. "You told me to tell the truth, Daddy, so I brought the truth with me." She looked back at the judge. "Your Honor, can I show you something my mommy doesn't know?" The judge looked at the small girl, then at the high-priced lawyers, and finally at me. He nodded slowly. "You may, Zariah." Zariah stepped forward, raised her tablet, and pressed the play button. And that was the moment the world stopped turning for Tmaine. The courtroom monitors flickered, then roared to life. For a moment, there was only the sound of static and the faint, rhythmic breathing of someone close to a microphone. Then, the image stabilized. It was a view from a high shelf in the dining room, hidden behind a stack of decorative porcelain. The video showed the dinner from 3 weeks ago, the night Tmaine had hosted his business associates. On screen, the guests had departed. I was shown clearing the table, my back to the camera. Tmaine entered the frame. He didn't look like the charismatic titan who had just been charming the judge. He looked like a predator. He walked up behind me and, without a word, grabbed my hair, yanking my head back. The courtroom let out a collective, sharp intake of breath. On the video, I didn't scream. I just closed my eyes, a silent tear tracking down my cheek. "The roast was dry, Nyala." Tmaine's recorded voice boomed through the courtroom speakers, sounding more like a snarl than a human voice. "You made me look like a fool in front of the Miller account. If you weren't so pathetic, I'd throw you out right now. But you're going to stay here and scrub this floor until I can see my reflection in it. Do you understand?" In the video, I nodded frantically. He pushed my head forward, nearly sending me into the pile of plates, and walked away. The judge's face was unreadable, carved out of stone. Tmaine was on his feet now, his face a frantic shade of crimson. "Your Honor, this is an invasion of privacy. This is a setup. That video is edited." "Sit down, Mr. Tmaine," Justice Miller said, his voice dangerously low. "The child is presenting evidence." Zariah didn't flinch. She swiped her finger across the tablet and a new video played. This one was from her own bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. You could see Tmaine sitting on the edge of her bed, the good father. "Listen to me, Zariah," the recorded Tmaine said, his voice a chilling, manipulative whisper. "When the judge asks you about Mommy, You have to tell him she's always sleeping. You have to tell him she forgets to feed you. If you don't, the police will take Mommy to a bad place, and you'll never see her again. You want to stay with Daddy in the big house with the toys, right? But Mommy isn't bad, Daddy, Zariah's small, recorded voice replied. Mommy is broken, Princess, and Daddy is the only one who can fix it, but only if you help me. The video cut to black. The silence in the courtroom was so heavy it felt like it was crushing the lungs of everyone present. Tmaine's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. His immaculate client had just been exposed as a domestic tyrant and a suborner of perjury. I looked at my daughter. She was standing there, her chin held high, looking directly at the father who had tried to weaponize her innocence. I realized then that she hadn't been avoiding me because she believed him. She had been avoiding me to protect her secret, the digital diary of our survival. There's more, Zariah said, her voice unshakable. I have folders for every month for the last 2 years. I have the times Daddy took Mommy's phone. I have the times he made her cry until she couldn't breathe. I have the business trips, too. She swiped again. A series of photos appeared on the screen, GPS logs from Tmaine's car, and photos of him at a luxury resort with a woman who was definitely not me, dated during the times he claimed to be at emergency conferences in Chicago. Tmaine collapsed back into his chair. The mask hadn't just slipped, it had shattered into 1,000,000 jagged pieces. Justice Miller leaned forward, looking at the tablet and then at Tmaine. Mr. Sterling, do you wish to continue with your argument that the defendant is the unstable party in this marriage? Sterling cleared his throat, his face pale. Your Honor, we require a recess to discuss these new developments with our client. No recess, Justice Miller snapped. He looked at Zariah with a look of profound respect. Zariah, you are a very brave young lady. You can go back to your mother now. Zariah didn't run. She walked. She walked over to the defense table, and for the first time in months, she threw her arms around my neck. I held her so tight I thought I might merge with her. I sobbed into her hair, not the tears of a failed woman, but the tears of a mother who had been saved by the very soul she thought she was failing to protect. I got it all, Mommy, she whispered into my ear. I saw what he was doing. I didn't let him delete us, but the battle wasn't over. Tmaine was a cornered animal, and as I looked up from Zariah's embrace, I saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't shame. It was a burning, incandescent rage. He had lost his reputation, his leverage, and his control, and a man like Tmaine would rather burn the world down than lose. The courtroom felt as though the oxygen had been sucked out of it. The high-definition monitors still glowed with the frozen image of Tmaine's betrayal. Justice Miller sat in a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight, his eyes locked on Tmaine, who was now trembling, not with sadness, but with the sheer, vibrating energy of a man whose carefully constructed empire had just turned to ash. Mr. Tmaine, the judge said, his voice echoing like a tolling bell. In 30 years on the bench, I have seen many bitter divorces. I have seen lies, and I have seen greed. But rarely have I seen such a calculated, cold-blooded attempt to dismantle a human being's soul, using their own child as the primary weapon. Tmaine's lawyer, Sterling, stood up, his hands visibly shaking as he adjusted his glasses. Your Honor, if I may, these recordings were taken without consent. They are a violation of privacy laws and— Silence, Mr. Sterling, Justice Miller roared, slamming his gavel with a force that made the water glasses on the tables jump. Do not speak to me of privacy when the evidence reveals a pattern of domestic psychological torture and child manipulation. This is no longer a simple dissolution of marriage. This is a crime scene. The judge turned his gaze to me. For the first time, he didn't see a failed wife. He saw a survivor. Nyala, the court is issuing an immediate temporary order. You are granted sole physical and legal custody of Zariah effective this second. Tmaine is to have 0 contact with the child. Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order against the plaintiff. He is to vacate the marital residence within 2 hours under police supervision. A small broken sound escaped my throat. It was the sound of a cage door opening after a decade of captivity. I squeezed Zariah's hand and she squeezed back, her small face solemn and resolute. As for the assets, the judge continued, given the evidence of financial abuse and the clear intent to defraud the defendant of her rightful share of the marital estate, I am freezing all of Tmaine's personal and corporate accounts until a full forensic audit can be completed. Every cent will be scrutinized. Tmaine suddenly bolted upright. You can't do that. That's my company. I built that from nothing while she sat at home and did nothing. You built it on the back of her unpaid labor and the stability she provided while you were out terrorizing your family, the judge snapped. Bailiff, escort Mr. Tmaine out of this courtroom. He is to be taken to the residence to collect his personal effects, and not a single item more. If he so much as looks at the defendant or the child, he will be held in contempt and jailed immediately. As the bailiffs moved toward him, Tmaine didn't go quietly. He shoved his chair back, the metal legs screeching against the floor. He looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, filled with a hatred so pure it felt like a heat wave. You think you won, Nyala? He hissed, leaning over the table as the officers grabbed his arms. You think you can take my life? You're nothing without my name. You're a ghost. You'll be back on the street in a month because you don't know how to survive in the real world. I've survived you for 10 years, Tmaine, I said, my voice finally finding its strength. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. The real world will be easy compared to you. They dragged him out. Even after the double doors closed, I could hear his muffled shouts echoing in the hallway. The courtroom began to clear, the spectators whispering and casting looks of awe at Zariah. My lawyer, Marcus, sat down heavily, wiping sweat from his forehead. Nyala, I've never seen anything like that. That little girl. She just did what a team of 10 lawyers couldn't do. She saved you. I knelt down so I was at eye level with Zariah. How did you do it, honey? How did you know? Zariah looked at the tablet in her lap. I saw you crying in the laundry room 2 years ago, Mommy. You thought I was asleep. Daddy was yelling about a shirt, and you were shaking. I remember thinking, if I don't remember this, no one will believe us. So I started using the video diary app for school. I just left it running. I hid it in the plants, in the books, in the kitchen. She looked at me, her lower lip finally trembling. I was so scared he would find it. But I knew if I showed you, he would take it away. I had to wait for the man in the black robe. I pulled her into my lap, right there on the floor of the courtroom, and wept. I had spent years trying to protect her from the truth, never realizing she was the one documenting the truth to protect me. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a new fear took its place. Tmaine was a man of immense resources and a fractured ego. Being humiliated in public was his greatest nightmare. The judge had given him 2 hours to leave the house, but I knew Tmaine didn't play by the rules. He was a man who saw everything as a transaction, and right now, he felt I owed him a debt of pain. Marcus, I said, standing up and grabbing my bag, we need to go, now. The police are with him, Nyala. You're safe, Marcus said. No, I replied, a cold intuition chilling my blood. Tmaine always has a backup plan. He's not going to just walk away from $3 million and his property. We need to get to the house before he does something desperate. We rushed out of the courthouse, the gray sky finally opening up into a torrential downpour. As we drove toward the suburbs, the rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the world. My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept thinking about the look in Tmaine's eyes, the look of a man who had nothing left to lose because he had already lost his soul. When we turned into our gated community, I saw the blue and red lights of a police cruiser parked in our driveway. Relief flooded me for a split second, but then I saw it. The front door was wide open, swinging in the wind. And there, standing in the middle of the rain-soaked lawn, was one of the officers, looking frantic and speaking into his radio. "Where is he?" I screamed, jumping out of the car before Marcus had even fully stopped. "Where is Tmaine?" The officer looked at me, his face pale. "Ma'am, stay back. He locked himself in the study. We heard a crash and then we smell gas." My heart stopped. He wasn't just leaving. He was going to make sure that if he couldn't have the life we built, no one could. The rain was a cold, needle-sharp assault against my skin, but I didn't feel it. The world had narrowed down to the open front door of my house. the house I had spent a decade polishing into a mirror for Tmaine's vanity. Now, that mirror was about to shatter. "Mommy, stay here!" Zariah cried from the car, her voice high and thin. Marcus, my lawyer, grabbed her hand, keeping her safely inside the vehicle. I ignored the officer's shout to stay back. I ran toward the house. As I crossed the threshold, the smell hit me. It wasn't the usual scent of expensive lilies and floor wax. It was the thick, sulfurous stench of natural gas. It was heavy, invisible, and deadly. "Tmaine!" I screamed, my voice echoing off the marble walls of the foyer. I heard a muffled thud from the second floor, coming from his private study. I raced up the stairs, my lungs burning from the gas-heavy air. The door to the study was heavy oak, and it was locked from the inside. "Tmaine, open this door! Zariah is outside! Think about your daughter!" "Zariah is the one who killed me," his voice roared from behind the wood. He sounded unhinged, his words slurred as if he were drunk on his own despair. "She betrayed her own blood. You poisoned her, Nyala. You turned my own legacy against me." Through the gap under the door, I could see a flickering light. Not a light bulb, a flame. My blood turned to ice. He hadn't just turned on the gas, he was holding a lighter. "The police are everywhere, Tmaine," I pleaded, pressing my face against the wood. "If you do this, you die. Is that what you want? To die a loser? To die known as the man who couldn't handle the truth?" The word loser seemed to pierce through his mania. For a man like Tmaine, being a loser was a fate worse than death. "I'm not a loser," he hissed, his voice right against the other side of the door. "I am the one who decides when this story ends, not some judge, not a 7-year-old, me." I heard the click, click, click of a Zippo lighter. "Tmaine, listen to me," I said, forcing my voice to drop into the low, soothing tone I used to use when he was in a corporate rage. "You love control. If you blow this house up, you lose control forever. You become a headline, a tragedy. But if you walk out now, you still have your life. You still have the chance to fight the audit. You still have a voice." "I have nothing!" he screamed. "I saw the look on the judge's face. I'm finished." Suddenly, the door handle turned. The door creaked open just a few inches. Tmaine stood there, his tie undone, his hair disheveled. In his right hand, he held a silver lighter. The flame was dancing, a tiny, lethal spark in a room filled with explosive vapor. The air in the study was shimmering. He had sliced the gas lines to the fireplace. "Look at you," he sneered, his eyes roaming over my rain-soaked clothes. "Still trying to play the hero. You're nothing but a failed wife who got lucky because her daughter is a spy." "I'm the woman who is giving you one last chance to be a father," I said, stepping into the room. "Don't come any closer," he warned, raising the lighter. "If you flick that, we both go," I said, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. "And Zariah will watch her house explode from the driveway. Is that the last memory you want her to have? Her father murdering her mother?" Tmaine looked past me, toward the window. Down in the driveway, in the flashing blue lights, he could see the small silhouette of Zariah standing by the car, held back by Marcus. She was looking up at the study window. For a second, the predator in his eyes wavered. The good father mask he had worn for years struggled to find a grip. He looked at the lighter, then at the window, then at me. She was supposed to love me," he whispered, a sudden, pathetic break in his voice. "She did love you, Tmaine. She loved you so much she spent 2 years hoping you would change. She didn't record you to destroy you. She recorded you to show the world why she was losing her father." The silence in the room was suffocating. The smell of gas was making my head swim. I felt dizzy, my knees beginning to buckle. "Tmaine, please." His thumb hovered over the wheel of the lighter. He looked at me with a mixture of intense hatred and a strange, sudden clarity. "Go," he said quietly. "What?" "Get out of the house, Nyala. Take her and go." "Not without you. If I leave, you'll light it." "I said go," he bellowed, shoving me toward the door with a strength that sent me sprawling into the hallway. As I scrambled to my feet, he slammed the door and locked it again. I didn't wait. I knew that tone. I ran. I flew down the stairs, my feet barely touching the marble. I burst out the front door and tackled the officer standing nearby, screaming, "Get back! Get back now!" We scrambled behind the police cruisers. I pulled Zariah into my arms, shielding her body with mine. 1 second passed. 2, 3. The explosion wasn't a roar. It was a dull, heavy thump that shook the ground beneath our feet. The windows of the study shattered outward, raining glass onto the lawn like diamonds. Smoke began to pour from the second floor, but there was no secondary blast. The fire department, already on site, rushed forward with hoses. Tmaine hadn't blown the whole house. He had lit a small fire in the fireplace, a controlled suicide attempt that the gas concentration wasn't quite high enough to turn into a total inferno. 10 minutes later, the firefighters dragged a limp, soot-covered body out of the front door. He was alive, coughing and gasping, but the man who had walked into that house 2 hours ago was gone. As the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, his eyes met mine. There was no more rage. There was only a hollow, empty shell. He had tried to take his life and failed at that too. Zariah buried her face in my chest. "Is it over, Mommy?" I looked at the house, the beautiful, expensive, cursed house. Smoke was staining the white pillars black. "Yes, Princess," I said, kissing the top of her head. "The story of the shadow is over. Now we start the story of the light." But as the ambulance sped away, I realized that starting over wasn't as simple as winning a court case. Tmaine was alive, and a man like him, even in a hospital bed, still had claws. The following weeks were lived in a strange, echoing limbo. The house, once a pristine museum of Tmaine's ego, now felt like a wounded animal. The smell of smoke lingered in the upper hallways, and the boarded-up windows of the study stood as a grim reminder of the fire that almost consumed us. But for the first time in a decade, the air inside felt breathable. There was no longer a predator stalking the corridors at 6 a.m. Tmaine was in a secure psychiatric wing of the city hospital, under both medical watch and police guard. His attempt to destroy the house while officers were present had resulted in a slew of felony charges: attempted arson, reckless endangerment, and obstruction of justice. The titan of industry was now a man in a paper gown, but his shadow still loomed over our bank accounts. "Nyala, we have a problem," Marcus said, dropping a heavy stack of folders onto my kitchen table. It was 3 weeks after the doomsday in court. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, and his tie was permanently crooked. "The audit?" I asked, pouring him a cup of coffee. I had stopped making it the way Tmaine liked it, bitter and black. Now the kitchen smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. "The audit is a labyrinth," Marcus sighed. "Tmaine didn't just hide money, he turned it into a ghost. On paper, his main company is a shell. The millions we thought were in the marital estate, they've been moving. In the 6 months leading up to him filing for divorce, he began a massive liquidation process." My heart sank. He was planning to leave me with nothing but the debt. "Exactly. He moved funds into offshore accounts, cryptocurrency, and a series of holding companies registered in the Cayman Islands under names that have nothing to do with him. If we can't trace that money, the total assets the judge promised you won't exist. You'll have a $3 million house with a massive mortgage and zero liquid cash to pay the taxes or the lawyers." I sat down, the old familiar weight of dread settling in my chest. Tmaine was still winning. Even from a hospital bed, he was strangling my future. "But there's one thing," Marcus added, his voice dropping. "There's a series of payments, large ones, $50,000 a month, going to a private entity called the Sentinel Group. It's not a business. It's a high-end private security and data recovery firm. He's been paying them for 3 years. Why would a CEO need that much data security for his personal accounts?" "He was hiding something bigger than an affair," I whispered. While Marcus puzzled over the numbers, I went to Zariah's room. She was sitting by the window, reading a book. She had become quieter since the trial, not a sad quiet, but a watchful one. She was like a soldier who had come home from the front lines and was still adjusting to the silence. "Zariah, honey," I said, sitting beside her, "when you were making those videos, did you ever see Daddy go into the basement? The old storage room behind the furnace? Zariah looked up, her eyes narrowing in thought. He told me never to go in there. He said the spiders would eat my soul. But I saw him go in there every Sunday night at 10. He would carry a small black bag. A black bag? Like a laptop bag, but heavier, and he always came out looking angry, like he had been fighting with someone. That night, after Zariah fell asleep, I took a flashlight and a heavy crowbar from the garage. I hadn't been in the basement storage room in years. Tmaine had kept it locked, claiming it was for hazardous cleaning supplies. The lock was a high-tech biometric scanner, but the fire had triggered the house's emergency reset system. With a few heavy strikes of the crowbar, the frame splintered. The room was cold and smelled of ozone. It wasn't full of cleaning supplies. It was a server room. A small, humming stack of black towers sat in the center, their blue lights blinking like malevolent eyes in the dark. Beside the servers was a small desk with a single laptop. I opened the laptop. It wasn't password protected. Tmaine's arrogance was his one true weakness. He never thought I'd have the courage to break down his doors. I began to scroll through the files. My breath hitched. This wasn't just corporate data. These were the shadow ledgers. Tmaine hadn't just been a successful businessman. He had been running a sophisticated kickback scheme, laundering money for overseas developers through his construction projects. But as I dug deeper into a folder marked Z Future, I found something that made my stomach turn. It wasn't a bank account for Zariah's college fund. It was a dossier. Tmaine had been tracking me. Every phone call I made, every person I spoke to at the grocery store, every friend I thought I had. He had paid the Sentinel Group to monitor my entire life. And then I found the final file. It was an audio recording, dated the night before he served me the papers. I pressed play. "Is the witness ready?" Tmaine's voice asked on the recording. "She's a child, Tmaine," a woman's voice replied. I recognized it instantly. It was the court-appointed psychologist who had testified against me. "But with the right incentives, she'll say whatever you need her to say about her mother's mental health. The $50,000 is in my account?" "The first half is," Tmaine replied. "The rest is yours once the judge signs the full custody order. I want Nyala erased. I want her to walk out of that courtroom with nothing but the clothes on her back and a reputation so ruined she can't even get a job as a maid." I sat on the cold concrete floor, the laptop screen illuminating the tears on my face. It wasn't just a divorce, it was a hit job. He had bribed the experts, he had bought the system. But Tmaine had forgotten one thing. He had trained me to be a shadow, and a shadow knows exactly where the light doesn't reach. I took out my phone and called Marcus. "Marcus, I found it. I found the money, the bribes, and the proof of a criminal conspiracy. But we can't take this to the divorce court." "Where are we taking it, Nyala?" "To the district attorney," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I don't want a divorce anymore. I want a conviction." The district attorney's office was a stark contrast to the polished mahogany of the family court. Here, the air smelled of stale coffee and the grim reality of justice. I sat across from DA Sarah Jenkins, a woman whose eyes looked like they had seen every shade of human depravity. Beside me, Marcus sat with the black laptop, the Pandora's box of Tmaine's life, plugged into a secure monitor. As the files scrolled by, the room remained deathly silent. He watched the evidence of bribery, the offshore transfers, and the recorded conversations that turned a domestic dispute into a high-level criminal conspiracy. "This isn't just a bad marriage, Nyala," DA Jenkins said, leaning back in her chair. She pointed to a folder containing the encrypted communications with the psychologist. "This is racketeering, witness tampering, and money laundering. Your husband didn't just want a divorce. He was using your household as a clearinghouse for international fraud. He needed you unstable and silenced so you would never look too closely at the basement." "I never cared about the money," I whispered. "I just wanted my daughter to be safe." "Well," the DA said with a cold, sharp smile, "thanks to this data, she's going to be safe for a very long time. And Tmaine? He won't be going back to a luxury villa or a psychiatric wing. He's going to a federal holding cell." Within 48 hours, the world turned upside down. The news of Tmaine's arrest hit the headlines like a tidal wave. "Local Titan accused of global money laundering," the banners screamed. The immaculate businessman was shown on every news channel, handcuffed to his hospital bed, his face hidden by a thin white sheet. The fallout was immediate. The law firm that had represented him, Hastings and Associates, scrambled to distance themselves. The court-appointed psychologist was arrested at the airport with a suitcase full of cash. The friends who had whispered about my instability at dinner parties suddenly went silent, their own accounts being frozen as the FBI began tracing the web of Tmaine's kickbacks. But inside our house, the atmosphere was different. The fear that had been my constant companion for 10 years was finally evaporating. I stood in the foyer, watching a team of federal agents carry out the last of Tmaine's personal servers. I felt a strange sense of mourning, not for him, but for the woman I had been. The woman who thought she was failed because she couldn't please a monster. "Mommy?" Zariah called out from the stairs. She was holding her tablet. "The man on the news said Daddy is going away for a long, long time. Is he coming back to the house?" I walked over to her and sat on the step, pulling her into my lap. "No, Princess. He's not coming back. This house is ours now. Truly ours." "Does that mean I don't have to record anything anymore?" she asked, her voice small. My heart broke a little at that question. A 7-year-old should be recording TikTok dances or pictures of clouds, not evidence of her mother's abuse. I took the tablet from her hands and looked into her eyes. "No more recording, Zariah. From now on, we only make memories that we want to remember." I spent the next few days purging the house. I threw out the expensive, uncomfortable furniture Tmaine had chosen. I donated his $3,000 suits to a charity for rehabilitated convicts. I opened every window, letting the scent of the rain and the neighborhood jasmine wash away the smell of smoke and gas. Marcus arrived on Friday evening with a bottle of sparkling cider and a thick stack of finalized court orders. "It's over, Nyala," he said, beaming. The judge in the civil case took one look at the DA's preliminary report and signed everything. You've been awarded the house, the remaining domestic assets, and a significant portion of the recovered funds as restitution for years of systematic abuse. You're a very wealthy woman in your own right now. I looked at the papers. For the first time, I didn't see numbers. I saw freedom. "What about Tmaine?" "He's facing 20 to 30 years, Marcus said, his face turning serious. "The feds don't play. He tried to trade information on his associates for a lighter sentence, but they already have everything they need from your basement server. He has nothing left to bargain with." That night, for the first time in a decade, I slept a deep, dreamless sleep. I didn't wake up at 5 a.m. to check the coffee. I didn't listen for the sound of his footsteps. I woke up at 8 a.m. to the sound of birds and the light of a new sun. But as I walked downstairs to make breakfast for my daughter, I noticed a small white envelope tucked under the front door. It wasn't from a lawyer. There was no stamp. My heart skipped a beat. I picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside was a single piece of lined paper, the handwriting shaky and desperate. "You think you've won the final act, Nyala. But shadows always return when the sun goes down. Ask yourself, who was the woman in the photos at the resort? She wasn't just a mistress. She was the beginning of my next plan." The blood drained from my face. Tmaine was behind bars, but the web he had spun was larger than I had ever imagined. The woman from the photos, the one Zariah had caught on the GPS logs, was still out there, and according to the note, she wasn't finished with us. The note felt like a live wire in my hand, scorching my skin with a familiar icy dread. I stood in the center of my sun-drenched kitchen, the silence of the house suddenly feeling hollow again. Tmaine was behind bars, but he was a man who specialized in contingencies. He had spent his life building safety nets for himself and traps for everyone else. I looked at the photos Zariah had captured months ago, the one from the resort. I had been so focused on Tmaine's betrayal that I hadn't looked closely at the woman beside him. She was elegant, with sharp feline features and eyes that looked like cold glass. I called Marcus immediately. "The woman in the photos, Marcus. Who is she, really?" There was a long silence on the other end. "I was just about to call you, Nyala." We ran her face through the database. Her name is Elena Vance. She isn't just a mistress. She's a high-level corporate liquidator. She specializes in moving assets for people who are about to lose everything. She's the sentinel behind the Sentinel Group. "The note says she's the beginning of a next plan," I whispered. "Nyala, listen to me." Marcus's voice was urgent. "The forensic auditors just found a second set of keys to the house. They weren't in Tmaine's possession when he was arrested, and more importantly, there's a trust fund, a hidden one, that was activated the moment Tmaine's heart rate spiked during his suicide attempt. It's an automatic retaliation trust." "What does that mean?" "It means he paid her to finish what he started if he was ever taken off the board. Get Zariah, get out of the house, go to the safe house I told you about." I didn't wait. I grabbed Zariah, who was playing in the backyard, and rushed to the garage. But as I pressed the button to open the heavy door, it didn't move. The power was dead. The house plunged into a sudden, unnatural darkness as the backup shutters, part of the security system Tmaine had installed, began to slide down over the windows, sealing us inside. "Mommy?" Zariah's voice was a small, terrified squeak in the dark. "It's okay, baby. Stay behind me." A soft, melodic chime echoed through the house's intercom system. Then, a woman's voice, calm, professional, and terrifyingly cold, filled the rooms. "Hello, Nyala. I'm Elena. Tmaine told me you were resilient, but he also said you were predictable. He knew you'd find the servers. In fact, he wanted you to find them. He knew the feds would take him down eventually. This house isn't just a home, Nyala. It's a liability. And in 5 minutes, it's going to be a memory." I realized then the depth of Tmaine's malice. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to ensure that if he couldn't have his legacy, it would be erased from the earth. The gas leak in the study hadn't been a failed suicide. It had been a test run. "You're in the house, Elena," I shouted at the ceiling. "You'll die too." "I'm not in the house, Nyala. I'm in the guest house across the lawn, watching the monitors. And I have the remote for the secondary gas mains, the ones the fire department missed because they were buried under the foundation." I felt a surge of adrenaline, a white-hot spark of the same defiance that had carried me through the courtroom. I wasn't the shadow anymore. I was the protector. "Zariah," I whispered, kneeling down. "Remember the secret tunnel we played in? The one that leads to the old wine cellar?" Zariah nodded, her eyes wide. "The one Daddy said was broken?" "It's not broken. It leads to the drainage pipes behind the property. I need you to go there now. Don't look back. When you get out, run to the neighbors and call the police." "What about you, Mommy?" "I have to finish something." I watched her disappear into the small crawlspace behind the pantry. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed the heavy crowbar I had used to break into the server room. I didn't head for the exit. I headed for the basement. Tmaine had built this house as a cage, but he had forgotten that a prisoner knows the cage better than the warden. I knew where the master override for the shutters was. It wasn't in the study. It was hidden behind a false panel in the laundry room, the room where I had spent a decade of my life. I found the panel. My fingers flew over the wires. I wasn't a technician, but I had watched Tmaine's repairmen for years. I ripped the red wire, bypassing the lockdown command. The shutters groaned and began to rise. Light flooded back into the foyer. On the intercom, Elena's voice lost its calm. "What are you doing? You can't override that." "I'm not the woman you read about in Tmaine's files, Elena," I said, standing in the middle of the foyer. "I'm the one who survived him." I didn't run out the front door. I ran to the guest house. I burst through the door just as Elena Vance was reaching for a small black detonator on the table. She looked at me, stunned. She wasn't used to her victims fighting back. Before she could press the button, I swung the crowbar, shattering the table and sending the remote skittering across the floor. We struggled, a desperate, silent battle between a woman paid to destroy and a mother born to protect. Elena was strong, but I was fueled by 10 years of suppressed rage. I tackled her, pinning her against the wall. "The police are already here," I hissed. "Zariah is safe. It's over." The sirens began to wail in the distance. Elena looked at me, her composure finally breaking. "He said you were a failure," she breathed, looking at the fire in my eyes. "He was wrong about a lot of things." The sun was setting over a small, modest cottage near the coast. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have marble floors or high-tech security. It had a porch that creaked and a garden full of wild, messy flowers. Zariah was sitting on the grass, sketching in a notebook. She wasn't recording videos for a judge anymore. She was drawing the ocean. Tmaine was serving 25 years in a federal penitentiary. Elena Vance was awaiting trial for attempted murder and conspiracy. The shadow ledgers had dismantled a criminal empire, and the money recovered had been used to set up a foundation for women escaping domestic and financial abuse. I sat on the porch, a cup of coffee in my hand, sweet, with plenty of cream, exactly how I liked it. I looked at my daughter and smiled. We had lost a mansion, a fortune, and a perfect life. But as the stars began to poke through the purple sky, I realized we had gained the only thing that mattered. We were no longer shadows. We were the light. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dark.